Now, the SABC has been plunged into another governance crisis as the board received 4 resignations, which President Cyril Ramaphosa has now accepted, effectively rendering the SABC leaderless and rudderless on the eve and on the verge of a bankruptcy. To look at the issue and to unpack it and to talk about how the board fell prey to the machinations of the minister that is in her position less than a month, we are joined on the line by William Bird. He is, of course, from Media Monitoring Africa, and then, of course, also Duduetsang Makuse from the Civil Society Formation, Media Monitoring Africa, and Save Our SABC. So these are our 2 guests. Duduetsang, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. William, good morning. I believe you are in Wales.
Hello, good morning. Yes, it's London, actually. It's still dark.
I'm so sorry that we had to wake you up early, but thank you so very much. The first thing I want to ask, William, is that we've now had 4 resignations. We've had the president accept the resignations, but there is a clause that says 3 months' notice have to be served. Have you had any communication with the presidency on whether those 3 months are going to be served out? So is the board actually still functional in terms of that 3 months?
So all indications are, given the comments from the presidency and given that they've engaged with Parliament and instructed them to fill the positions as soon as possible, it appears that he has accepted the resignations on the terms requested from those who have resigned. In other words, it looks as though, and most of them, as I understand it, have asked to be released from their duties immediately, which means that the president has said to them, okay, thank you very much, resignation accepted on those terms, which means that the board, as far as we understand it, is in court. We haven't yet had any full confirmation of that, but I think given the comments coming from the presidency and from the portfolio committee, that certainly appears to be the case, which means it's a deliberately engineered crisis, and it also means, I think, that the president has to be questioned, and we need to have his reasons as to why he has allowed these board members to resign and effectively leave the SABC board in that position.
Duduetsang, let me bring you in here. I mean, the SABC has been in a crisis for a very long time. We had to almost threaten to take President Zuma to court to actually institute this board. This board has put a plan in place. Of course, it deals with retrenchments, but it's not the only part of the turnaround strategy. Who do you think benefits when this board collapses?
I think if you look at the whole situation holistically, the most obvious conclusion one would arrive at is that the ruling party would benefit. I think obviously that's a very short-sighted way of looking at it, because if the SABC collapses in this instance, the potential for recovery and therefore for recapture is actually almost zero, because there'd be nothing to recapture post the collapse of the board. And I think that's one of the things that we keep reiterating, is that in this instance, it wasn't a leadership crisis. It's more of a political will crisis, because we've had the best individually, most highly qualified members of the board to date. These were the best we could get. So, yeah.
I still don't know what's actually going on. I mean, and I hope you can explain a little more. So the minister, who's 2 weeks into the job, suddenly arrives at the SAB. She has a meeting with the staff before meeting the board, and then presumably the management. Then she meets the board, where she gives them literally 5 minutes to change their minds about a structural plan that's taken a year to put together, right? And then storms out saying and then members of the board resign. Now, are they resigning in protest at what she did or in support of what she did? Duduetsang, what do you...
So it seems like each member resigned for different reasons.
Yes.
You know, Ms. Kweyama seems to have had other reasons in terms of her other commitments. It sounds like Mr. Tsedu resigned because of the fact that they actually have no resources and they've been asking for 18 months. Mr. Mattison, I'm not quite clear on what his reasons were. But underneath it all is really also, again, for us, the thing that was a big concern was her ability to come in with a political delegation to want to comment on operational issues, which we felt was a bit of a cross over the line there, because she had been in Parliament, and I was sitting in that session where Parliament said, look, we're happy to go and engage with the staff ourselves as the committee. And we're happy for the board to come back to us with a different plan around retrenchments, because remember, that was the stalemate issue.
Yeah.
And there she goes 2 or 3 days after the fact and directly engages with staff and unions without the board there and without the committee there. I mean, right there, you're crossing a very thick line that is very clear. You can't do that as a political actor. And I think that was part of the problem. She did it.
This is what I wanted to ask you, William. I mean, Stella Ndabeni-Abrahams was in fact Faith Mutambi's deputy of communications. We mustn't forget that. Yes. She was there the entire time that the organization was being plundered, that Faith tried to use the Companies Act to trump the Broadcasting Act. We have an incredibly far-reaching, ruling that was given by the court. And of course, Mr. Budlander put that case on your behalf. Give us your breakdown of what that ruling says in relation to the role of the shareholder vis-à-vis the board, vis-à-vis the executives.
So what it did was essentially reverse what for almost a decade and a half has been the practice, which is that ministers prior to that had happily engaged with the SABC, the board, the senior executives, and decided that in fact they had a key role to play in who was hired and who was also fired. So their level of interference meant that they created two centers of power. So your senior executives like Mr. Gotsoning and before him, Daniel Forth and the like, for example, always had to report both to the board and to the minister, which meant that your board effectively became, its independence was critically undermined. And what that really did was it said, in future, the board and only the board are responsible for the appointments of the senior executive team, and they are the only ones who can also hire and fire those people. So it's set up clear reporting lines, and it also then stopped the minister from interfering in the operational elements of the SABC. So it didn't say they're not accountable, and I don't think anyone said that they shouldn't be accountable to both Parliament and certainly to the minister in various respects. But you can't then go and say, well, we're going to just happily go and engage. I mean, can anyone think of an example where the minister went and engaged with the unions for SAA or Danel or ESCOM, directly before speaking to the board? I mean, it's an extraordinary kind of situation. The minister would have known all of these things, precisely because, as you pointed out, she was under.
She's acted with him.
So and their advisors critically were there, and they're the ones who need to be held accountable for this mess, actually, because, to have said to the minister, Madam Minister, yes, go ahead and go do this, I think is grossly irresponsible.
Absolutely, especially because that ruling is very recent. I mean, it's less than a year old. And she should surely, when she was given this portfolio, be familiarizing herself with what legal and what ethical and what codes of standards she is being, held accountable for. One of the things that's also, of course, happening at the SABC is there are two panels that are looking at jobs for pals through sexual favors, and the other is political interference, the one that is being chaired by Joe Tlorwe. Now, we haven't heard yet what their findings are, but my sources at the SABC says that they're struggling to find a smoking gun. Now, I mean, we had an entire parliamentary process where during that process, journalists were actually threatened with their lives. Will Walker was threatened with his life. Suna Venter is dead. I mean, why would you say that you don't have a smoking gun because Cloudy didn't write anything down? He just stood across people and intimidated them.
I mean, that's the first I'm hearing of that. I found that an extraordinary claim. And I think, to the SABC's credit, they came out recently and said, we're going to implement the recommendations of the Sexual Harassment Commission and its findings, and they've already suspended some of the people involved in that. I think the other one, the editorial one, certainly we made a submission to that, and I would be extraordinarily surprised if they said that there's no evidence or smoking gun around so many of the people and actors involved directly in editorial interference. I think they've heard many stories from many of the SABC employees, and if that happens, it's something else is going on.
Duduetsang, what do you reckon the agenda is here? I mean, why would she have done this so quickly? Because my understanding from the board, that board members I know, is that they were united on the plan, and that the chairman was supportive. And suddenly, the Sunday Times is reporting today that actually, no, there's division on the board about the plan, and I just simply don't understand who's spinning what.
Exactly.
I've sat with two members of the board. They were happy with the chairman. You're now saying that they might not have been.
I've actually heard something different. So I spoke to one of the board members that resigned, and one of the reasons the board member resigned is because the board member can't work with the chair. And there's also the fear that because he was linked to one of former President Jacob Zuma's wives' charity, that he's still reporting elsewhere, and that this is a fight back from Saudi in one way or the other. The other thing that one also has to, of course, take into consideration is that MultiChoice has just awarded a new license for a current affairs program on their channel. And what is very interesting is that the people who won the bid are former SABC workers, one of whom is said to be very close to Saudi. And what is really interesting to do is that the head of that channel's editorial panel is in fact none other than Joe Chloe. So, I mean, there's layers to this thing. And then, of course, there is the idea of the capture of this organization. I mean, you guys have been at this campaign for very long. You know the machinations. How does it look to you? What is at play here?
So there's multiple things at play. Let's start with a seemingly united board suddenly falling apart. Yeah. I think one of the things that escalated that, or rather sort of became a catalyst for that, was the issue of retrenchments. Remember, we're about 6 months away from elections. Yeah. There isn't a single party in the country that's going to openly come and say, of course, you can retrench because the economic reality in the institution is that you are actually bloated, right? So there's that coming into play. And there, the committee suddenly moves from we're strengthening the board and supporting the board to drawing a line in the sand and saying, we want you to go back and do this independent audit, which, by the way, is going to be costly, might take a good 6 months, might require independent external consultants who come with a high price tag as well. And you have to do that with no mention of previous skills audits having been done, no mention of how this audit would interplay with those audits and their own recommendations. Because remember, the 2017 ad hoc report had clear specifications of what the interim board needed to do regarding staff. Yeah. There were appointments that were done that were not supposed to have been, irregular salary increases, all well documented in that report. Now, the parliamentary committee doesn't say to the board, take all these things into play and come up with a different plan. They come up with an ultimatum and they say, we want an independent audit or we don't move on anything, you know? And this means we're not even going to give you the political support for the government guarantee that you need. So good and well to have a turnaround strategy that we all agree on, but not so great when we can't even recapitalize the institution to institute the plan. So that's the one thing at play there. Elections and the plan and, you know, politicians drawing the line. Now you come into the fact that, great, you guys are in a stalemate, you're collapsing, your political head flies in to come and tell you what to do, and then your competitors are thinking, well, this is wonderful, this is an opportunity for us to come and take over this gap that you're going to leave, because there will be a massive gap if the SABC collapses, no qualms about it. Of course, the competitors are going to benefit. MultiChoice will benefit greatly if they get to set up a whole new news and current affairs entity in the absence of the SABC. Exactly. So they also do benefit to a degree. Are they part of the ploy? I don't know. Has there been questions around the board chair? Yes, there have been. But our experience to date has shown that he has been an independent chairperson leading his team towards a specific direction.
Okay, Duduetsang, let's just give William the last word. William, you have requested a meeting with President Ramaphosa to discuss this matter. Have you heard back from the President? Is he granting you an audience?
To date, we've had any formal communication with him. We've been trying through whatever channels and back channels we have access to, and I don't think that meeting's going to happen, to be perfectly honest. And again, and in reality, we don't really need to meet with them because the plan is pretty damn clear and obvious, and it has been for over a year now, which is give the SABC a guarantee like we give to any other entity that is in desperate need. This is a critical public institution that needs the money in order to operate. The fact that they failed consistently to give them the guarantee, it really boggles the mind, and it suggests that this is a deliberately engineered crisis to push the SABC to the brink.
Absolutely. William Bird, thank you so very much. Also, Dudu, thank you very much for coming in. Still ahead on The Fix, we take a closer look at the stories making headlines in this morning's Sunday papers.